Native Bar in Singapore is currently number 47 on the world's 50 best bars list and number 20 on the Asia list. Please put your hands together for Vijay Mudaliar.
Hey guys, it's good to be here in Macau with you guys. My name is Vijay Mudaliar from Singapore. So before we start, there's going to be a couple of drinks coming around for you guys, and just to ease you guys after the lunch break. To tell you a little bit more about the cocktail that you'll be getting, we're using a little bit of gin mare, so thank you to the guys from Gin Mare for helping us out today. So it's going to be a little bit like a sort of like a light sort of gin and tonic spritzer-like. And we've made sort of our own tonic cordial with it, with a bit of foraged blue pea flowers and a little bit of calamansi. Calamansi is a citrus that we use heavily back home. It's got that refreshing sort of flavor to it. At the same time, it's going to lend sort of that bitter element to your drink. So first of all, before we start, I'd like to thank the guys from 50 Best for arranging this for us. I think it's very exciting to sort of bring that closure between restaurant and bars, especially in the sense that we share a lot of similarities in our culture. A little bit about myself. I'm from Singapore, and I think that before we go into the slides, it's quite nice to sort of explore a little bit more about Singapore, because what we do is heavily based on an idea of who we are, where we're from, and what's around us. So for myself, I was born in Singapore, my grandparents and my great-grandparents as well. But if you came to Singapore, you realize that a lot of people, we look very different in terms of our cultures and flavors and the food and drinks that we eat. But we often recognize ourselves as Singaporeans. And that's because in the last 150 to about 200 years, everyone who's migrated there has sort of formed a very strong culture. And in terms, if you came to Singapore and you go down to the hawkers and to the drink stalls, you realize that we forge not only our own cuisine and drinks, but also, in a sense, our own language, which we call Singlish, Singapore English. And that's basically English with drops of different dialects. It could be like Hokkien, a little bit of Tamil, which is what I speak, and Mandarin, Malay, and so forth. And the great thing about Singapore is you get a lot of diversity. You get little pockets of New York, London, Melbourne, and so forth. And for myself, I've been really lucky to have been in a couple of bars that I would recognize globally as one of the greatest bars in the world. And when it came 11 years later for me to open up my own space, the question came about, like, what would I do? And especially in Singapore, with such an international reach, sometimes we are heavily dependent on import, and something from really far off seems really luxurious. And so in our culture, I felt there was a little bit too much of that and too little of us. So I wanted to sort of look into our traditions. What did my grandparents use? What my parents used in their cooking and in their cuisine? And I realized that I didn't really understand that much as well. So I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, and what I did was I embarked on a solo mission of foraging, or what I'll call like urban foraging in Singapore. So in a city with a lot of landscape, there's little pockets of areas where you could find a couple of things. And I realized that I did start to find little smaller things like wild sorrel to cinnamon leaves, and that got my mind thinking, like, is there a little bit more? And that's how Native came about. So if you came to the bar in Native, you realize that you looked at the spirits on the back wall, you wouldn't find any of your usual spirits. So the whole idea is to source closer to home. So we don't have like Scotch, tequila, or bourbon. What we do have is like Indian whiskey, Filipino rum, Sri Lankan arak, Thai gins, and working with local brewers, working with local meat makers as well. And that idea extends to our entire venue. So even our furniture is made with like local carpenters, our ceramics, our aprons, and for our music as well, it's all local musicians. And the idea was to sort of, as a small 60-seater bar, we're sort of a little guy, and the whole idea stemmed from like, hey, what if little guys could work with more little guys, sort of strength in numbers. And I hope as we go on in our slides, we'll be able to explain to you guys about what we do and more importantly, why we do what we do. So this is our logo. One of my good friends of mine helped us design it. So if you look at the letters like NTIVE, they're actually inspired by the Singapore stone. So the Singapore stone is the last fragments of a piece with our indigenous language left on it, but till today no one could sort of really decipher entirely what it means. So the letters NTIVE is inspired by the stone, and the A is actually international glyph for explore. So the whole idea we had was, yes, we want to be local, but creatively and in terms of sharing, we wanted to expand globally. So being local, but extending our ideas globally, so hence native. This is how we look if you came up through the entrance. We're in a 180-year-old shop house, which is very historical. And if you look at the brick walls, the beams, and the floorings, they're all the natural instead of the building, which is what made us fall in love with it. And one of the older gentlemen who was constructing the bar, when he first came in, he grew up on Amoy Street, and he looked at the brick walls, and he was saying, oh my God, that's the exact brick walls that I remember as a kid. And he was telling us the story of how each brick was set out in the sun to dry, handmade, and different days you get different temperatures, and hence you get the different colors that made up that brick walls. So it only made sense to move into a building with a little bit of history and tradition as we are exploring ours. And if you look at the bar, it's actually a one-shaped piece. The whole idea of the bar was to make it look sort of like a ship, because that's how our forefathers came into town, so in respect to that. And if you look at the copper patterns, they actually represent the ripples. The idea behind that was, on a busy night, hopefully if we can't serve or we can't give attention to everybody, hopefully whoever we serve, our ideas and hospitality sort of travels with the ripples. Just some of the spirits that we saw, so I'd like to just quickly talk about it. From the left, we've got Paul John from Goa, and very interestingly, it's near the coastline, so you get a little bit of salinity in the whiskey, the sort of sea-like flavor. And then moving forward, we have Lamai, an agricole-style rum from Thailand, made from sugarcane juice, fermented and distilled. So you see that we work quite heavily with a lot of rum, different styles of rum and molasses and sugarcane produce, and that's because sugarcane is indigenous to first recorded finds in Philippines and India, so it only makes sense that with the quality of sugarcane available in the region, there's a lot of rum producers coming about, and also tying that with a little bit of history. Prior, a molasses-style rum used from native sugarcane, aged in Thailand as well. Zabana, a single barrel bottling of Filipino rum, which also shows that a lot of the spirits that we're starting to get, or a lot of the distilleries and brewers that are popping up in the region, are not only being local and trying to explore that local identity, but also in a sense that really pushing the mark. And I believe some of the spirits can be competitive globally with any other brands. Paper Lantern, a distillery that we work quite closely with. It's a Singaporean company, distilling up in Chiang Mai. So the idea was to work closely with farmers and improving farmers' wages. So they work with individual farmers to create a rice distillate first, and then that gets made into a gin with a little bit of Szechuan peppercorn, galangal, lemongrass, and a little bit of longan Thai honey in there. So the idea of respecting terroir and improving people's life around that distillery is what we really respect. Old port rum, spice rum with a little bit of vanilla, anise, cinnamon flavors. Shalom Bay distillery in Phuket, once again using native sugarcane from Phuket, and although it creates less yield, the idea that they want to stick to tradition and the fact that the native sugarcane produces a lot more flavor is what keeps them grounded, and once again improving the farmers and the workers' lives in the distillery. And they're also working on composting the leftover sugarcane and then using that back into the sugarcane fields. So not only like are the distillers that are coming up in the region, in my opinion, world class, they're also making change around them, which is something that we highly respect. Next up, Kavalan whiskey, Taiwanese whiskey. I think in the last few years, whiskey that needs no explanation. It's won a lot of global awards as well. and one of the most experimental whiskey distilleries at the moment, in my opinion. Isan, a Thai cold rum coming up a bit of north of Thailand. Amrut, which is from Bangalore. So Amrut basically means water of life, same like how Uskeba, the term for Gaelic that they use for whiskey. All organic, Indian malt, water from the Himalayas as well. So very interesting. Some of the produce that we use that I'd like to share with you guys. So top left, we have Tongkat Ali, a root that has been traditionally used in medicinal purposes, but at the same time, if you have a heavy dose of it, it's meant to boost virality. So very cheekily, we added it in a cocktail called the Red Light District in one of our own menus, a small dose of that. Pink dragon fruits, which we not only use for color and flavor, but we also make a water kefir, a fermented sort of beverage with that. Bottom left, we have jaggery, reduced Indian cane sugar. At the same time, you could find coconut palm sugar versions of it as well. Really tasty, a lot more flavors. And up top, we've got some Sri Lankan cinnamon punched with a lot of flavor. We've got organic coconut oil that we work with from a producer in Cambodia, single origin, coffee beans from India. Top right, we've got basil seeds, and bottom right, we have a little bit of foraged cinnamon leaves that we use for infusions. So when we came about to making our cocktails, the idea was like, do we take a template that we have of like classic cocktails, old-fashioned, and use Indian whiskey to make an old-fashioned? And it's something that we really didn't want to do. So we worked backwards, and we worked from ground up. And for our cocktails, and if you came to Native, we actually don't serve any classic cocktails. We focus on the menu and the produce. So we go from ground up, and we look at things like tradition, flavors, historically, how have these flavors been used, the distillers and what's around them, and how do they naturally pair their spirits with. So this is a cocktail that was inspired by the Peranakan culture. So the Peranakan culture is very unique to especially Singapore and Malaysian, a very unique mix of Indian, Chinese sort of flavors. And to me, one of the best cuisines in the world. Some of the flavors that they use are only unique to the Peranakan culture, such as the buah keluak, the black nut, and the canna nut buah keras. So we look at one of the desserts. It's called the kueh salad, which is basically a butterfly blue pea dessert with a bit of coconut and pandan. In the drink, we actually use jackfruit rum, a little bit of laksa leaves, gula melaka, a bit of pandan, and we source a local goat's milk from Hay Dairies in Singapore. And a very interesting thing about the jackfruit is the enzymes in the jackfruits actually splits the goat's milk apart, which is why the cocktail comes out nice and clear. The leftover curds, we actually mix it with a bit of coconut pandan, goes back into the jelly. And up top, we actually grate some jackfruit seeds, which have traditionally, like if my parents and my grandparents, they used to, the jackfruit seeds, boil them with a little bit of salt. And it's got this real nutty sort of coconut flavor. At the same time, sort of exploring every part of the produce, not wasting any part of it, which is something that we work heavily on. This is the chai. So this was inspired by like a Bombay street chai. So what we do is we make our own 5-spice mix for this, a little bit of turmeric, cardamom, pomegranate seeds, maize, and a bit of cinnamon leaves, Indian rum, and we get Darjeeling tea, the first cuts, the top part of it, and we use a little bit of cashew milk in there as well, and we put in the sous vide at 65 degrees, so when it goes out to the customer, it's served warm and is ready to go, not too hot. And we work with a local ceramic maker to come up with this nice chai-looking glass. And the idea behind it is, as much as we can, we try to work with our ceramic maker as, for this one especially, you know, ceramics, it's made by hand, and it's porous, so it's sort of like a living, breathing thing. So the moment the customer picks it up, we sort of have this nice human connection to it as well. This is a cocktail that we call the Arak Bali, so inspired by a spirit that we get from Bali called Arak. And to me right now, Arak is one of the most exciting spirits out there globally. In different parts of the world, Arak would be classified differently. So in the Middle East and Greece, you would get sort of an anise sort of flavored liquid, and then you come down to Sri Lanka, India, it's made from the coconut flower sap. And Indonesia right now is the most interesting because different states make arak differently. So either primarily from molasses, coconut flour, or with a little bit of Javanese red rice. And in some states, they even blend 2 to 3. So it's very exciting for us. Add in a little bit of tropical Balinese flavors with a little bit of papaya, ginger, banana. And up top, we sort of recreated a Balinese paddy field with a bit of edible flowers, tarragon flowers, blue pea. And we've got a tempeh that's been caramelized and glazed with what we call kicap manis, like a sweet soy glaze. And once again, working with our local ceramic maker to create a ceramic glass. The face that you see on the ceramics, the legend goes, her name is Rangda, and apparently if you have too much arak, she'll come visit you late at night. So no worries, we're not serving that today. One of the things that we do at the bar is, I wouldn't really like to coin the term as foraging, firstly because of the landscape that we're in, but we do get lots of pockets of greenery in Singapore, and we go out into the wild looking for ingredients. And one of the biggest misconceptions that we get is sometimes to forage, to sort of make it look exquisite, or go out into the wild and tell the customer, like, this has been sort of plucked from the wild. But that's not what we try to focus on. The main reason why we go out into the wild is, once again, for a lot of Singaporeans moving forward so quickly, sometimes we forget a lot about traditions, and sometimes we're not even sure of what grows in our own land or what we've used traditionally. So going out into the wild, finding things like star fruits, mini cucumbers, jackfruits, pink jasmines, wild sorrel, belimbins, even durians, and so forth, it gives us a better idea of what we can actually use in our cocktails, because if it grows together, it goes together, and what grows around us just gives us a better idea of how we can sort of connect our environment to the people that come to our bar as well. So one of the things that we were faced with earlier on is, especially in Singapore, we found a lot of things out there in the wild, but how do we actually sort of be a bit more sustainable to the environment? At the same time, although we found quite a few things, it's very little of each thing. So how do we sort of extend the flavors? And sort of looking back to our tradition, especially in Singapore, and listening to our parents and grandparents' stories during the war, preservation was always a big part of our culture, knowing that, we're not going to have a fresh produce for a long time. So learning how to keep that either by salt preservation or making vinegars and so forth. So that's some of the things that we do. So we find some wild turmeric, and it's not a lot. So what we do is we make a turmeric bug out of it, sort of how back in the day they used to make like ginger bugs to make ginger beers. So we ferment the turmeric, and then just a small bit of that goes into a little bit more coconut water, so we stretch out the flavors, and that's one of the drinks that we're working on at the moment. So taking little but stretching those flavors out and pickling, and we're starting to make our own yeast strains, not in terms of a lab sort of movement, but sort of fermenting, and the top layers that you get contains a lot of natural yeast, scooping that up and trying to preserve that, and fermenting our beverages as well, using scobies to make kombuchas and vinegars. We're quite lucky to have a rotovap, so what we do is we create like hydrosols and neutral grain-based extractions using the rotovap. One of the things that we try to do at the bar is also a little bit more of mindful bartending, try to extend that idea by, once again, exploring the idea of sustainability. So we actually use lotus coasters for our coasters, end of the night, that gets dried up, and then we can use it again for our customers for about 15 to 20 turns, after which it goes into a compost. So we do a primary composting, which is what you would call a bokashi compost. So we spray a little enzyme on the compost, and 2 weeks later you get that little liquid on the side over there, and that you can stretch out by 10, and you can use for hand sanitizers and mopping the floors as well, after which it goes into our secondary composting with a little bit of leftover coffee grains from the cafes nearby us, soil, and it takes from anywhere from about 4 to 6 months to compost, which in the end goes into a small garden that we've started and has been thriving for the last 3 to 4 months. We don't use any plastic straws, we use metal straws. And one of the biggest sort of wastages in a bar happens to be citruses, because after using the lemon juice or lime juice, it just goes into the trash. So at our bar, we actually don't use any fresh citrus. We try to explore that idea with vinegars, yogurt whey. We've used ants as well for their acidity in our cocktails. The entire bar is powered by solar energy. We don't use any tissues, so we made some linen napkins and we just bring it home to wash every day. We don't use, for our sous vide infusions, we don't use like the plastic bags or Ziplocs. We use jars, and the water that's left over from the sous vide goes into the mop, and then that mop water goes into washing the toilets, and we recycle our glass, metals, as well. Leftover paper, we blend it up, we make our own paper for staff notes as well, and we're working with smaller breweries in Singapore to sort, and a meat maker. So when we're done with our beers and meat, what we do is we wash the bottles for them, give it to them, they refill it and send it back to us. We have like little keep cups for our coffee runs with our staff. We go fresh into the market, so we cut the suppliers. We go fresh into the markets, get our produce, and as a small bar, we are able to do that, bring it back to the bar, so reducing sort of that carbon footprint as much as we can. Not entirely, but as much as we can. We use LED lights for the entire bar, takes up less electricity. Yeah, and as we speak at the moment, what we're doing at the bar back home is we've started to do a plaster layer on the walls, which is basically made up of eggshells and algae. So what that does, it becomes a living, breathing thing, so it cleans up the air, but at the same time, in a country like Singapore where it's really hot, it reduces the humidity in the room, and we are able to use less aircon in the vicinity. And we measure our trash every day, so we don't have any trash bags because the trash gets really light. So you see on an average Friday night on the screen, it says about 38. We've gone as low as 9 grams, and on an average right now, we have about 24 grams. So every night, there's a little trash measurement sheet, and we write it like, okay, what's the trash? And we try to work on it slowly. So we started from less than a kg, 800, 700, 600, 500, 400, 300, and now we're at 20 grams. So like some of the things that you might find in our trash is leftover tissue that the customers bring in, and maybe some of the bottle labels. So the question was like, why are we even labeling our bottles with like tape? Why not just use a reusable marker and just write it, and then once you're done, scrape it out and use it again? So a lot of questions that we ask ourselves, and we're not perfect because there's a lot of things that we need to work on, and sometimes with the idea of sustainability is that the idea of zero waste, but when you hit zero waste, that there is still so much to work on, carbon footprints. We still have air cons and fridges. So really just pushing it one at a time. So, and I think that's one of the reasons we are here today, is to share with like-minded people about what we do, and hopefully we can sort of grow as a community. And that's about it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Wow, thank you, Vijay. Fascinating insight into the world of bartending, and I love the idea of the mindful bartending and the sustainability. So we've got a few minutes for questions. So I'm going to start with a little question from me, which is, what is the most interesting or unusual ingredient you've ever managed to incorporate into a cocktail, and what cocktail did you make?
We had a cocktail in our menu called the ants, so we used like foraged ants from Singapore, the weaver ants, and so we didn't use acidity in our cocktails, and that was one of the ways that we introduced acidity in our cocktails. And just studying ants altogether is it's really interesting. in a sense that they're very much like humans. They go back into a colony, and ants are actually really clean because they go back into sort of a colony, a home, just like us. And if they were to bring any like diseases, they will spread it to the entire colony. So they have this little liquid in their belly, which they use to constantly clean themselves. And the formic acid that's produced by them, which is the acidity that we used in the cocktail, is actually sort of a defense mechanism that they used. And last year we sold about 150,000 little fellas, so yeah, that's quite a bit.
Wow. How do you actually collect the ants?
Sorry?
How do you collect the ants?
So we catch them in a little box, and we just put it in the freezer straight away, and then we use them. Because if you dry them, they lose the acidity.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Questions for Vijay? Who would like to ask a question?
Any questions from the audience? Raise your hand and I'll run the microphone to you. I'm looking. I'm going to ask you a question.
There's one over there after yours.
Well spotted. He's got.
Hey Vijay, thanks for that. Do you do any pop-ups around Asia, and also would you consider opening similar kind of ventures in other countries and exploiting the local produce there?
Yeah, we've done quite a few pop-ups around the world, and I think it's really exciting in a sense that once again, we're not saying we know everything about what we do. We're on a discovery, and when we travel and we understand like another culture's produce, to me, it's just really exciting. And every time we do that, it's just starting from blank. So it's just like your brain's so fresh and so much inspiration as well. In terms of opening similar to native in other countries, I would love to. But we're a small 60-seater bar in Singapore, and we've opened for about 15 months, and I've not gotten much sleep. So I just can't imagine having a few and having even less sleep at the moment. But in the future, that I think could be really exciting. And I think what we really strive for is not for native to be the bar that sources the regional produce, but what we really hope for that is more people start doing what we do, and then it becomes a conversation, and we get to source together, more brains together on the same topic. We could explore a lot more as a community, and I think that's what we really hope happens in the next couple of years, sharing ideas and just more people on a similar track.
Great. More questions?
Hi Vijay, I'm Evelyn. I'm from Singapore.
Yeah, hi.
Coming from Singapore, I must say that I'm really amazed at what you're doing. I know you're using local ants. I know you're doing some foraging, but there are so many other things that you're doing that I'm not aware of. And may I know what inspired you to do Asian sourcing? It's very difficult coming from Singapore because we don't have many.
I think for us, it was one of those things where before we started, it was a huge challenge because we went out to people who we would think would be technically able to do these things. We went to special music producers, like, could you create us a playlist with local musicians? And they were like, it's not possible. Like, I could get you maybe 60 tracks. And right now, just by having that conversation with local musicians, we've got about 500 to 600 local musicians on our music playlist, and the local radio stations don't even play the local musicians. And every day we have people coming to the bar who are so impressed by music, shazamming it, and when we give them our playlist, we tell them the artist, and we tell them it's a local artist, they get so surprised that it's a local musician. So one of those things that really, really got me to do this was just sort of a quick snap, like one day, like how much do I really know about ourselves, and how much do I really know about what we do, and my parents and my grandparents, how much do I know about our history? And when we first started the bar just 15 months ago, we didn't have enough, but we just wanted to start. So we actually started the bar with 12 bottles, and it was a very empty bar. And we gave ourselves actually 3.5 years to fill up a back bar. And but if you came to the bar now, it's full. And the only reason that happens is because, once again, it's growing a community and having a conversation. So, the distillers and the brewers, they pop up from nowhere and they come like, hey, I'm producing this. What do you think about it? And I was like, I'll love it. Let's stock it. And we get emails, and friends and family that are actually here today, you know. They travel, they bring like 2 bags of like, have you heard of this, have you heard of that? And I was like, I've never heard of those things. So once again, it's that conversation, and I think it's a lot more exciting when you compare to what the world has already become, and everything, a lot of things that we see has been exhausted to its maximal potential, but especially what we are doing, and for us, you know, like holding a new bottle, holding a new produce, and not knowing anything about it, I think that's very exciting for us. So I hope that answers your question.
Any final questions? Yes, Jill, I'm going to run to you. Great. I lost.
Hi, Vijay. Jill, do you play?
Hey.
Hi, Australian Financial Review. I loved what you said about if it grows together, it goes together. I think that's really beautiful, and a lot of the chefs are also following that belief. Have you got any surprising examples for us of that, where, you know, perhaps the ants came with something that the ants liked that you also enjoyed? And do you think also that it applies to people? That, I mean, you're making cocktails for people all over the world. Does a person in Singapore have a different taste of your cocktail to a person in Sydney or a person in Macau? Is that philosophy of yours that things that grow together, go together, apply to people? Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's very interesting because when we first started, you know, the cocktails that we were making had no templates or no sort of safety nets or no similarities to something that someone's had before. So we were very curious to see how people would take it, be it the locals, the tourists, and the expats. So what I can give you is a feedback from the last 1 year of from the bar and also traveling. It might not be a lot, but this is what I have at the moment, is that for us, especially, the locals feel very excited to see something that's familiar to them in sort of a different setting. And the expats and the tourists feel that, you know, this is very interesting and they've never seen it before. So to them, it's also very exciting. And when we've traveled and we brought our drinks, we found that most people are open-minded to what we bring. And we've also done event in Margaret River, which I believe that's where we met last year. So we worked with some chefs who use only Western Australian ingredients. So quite a similar idea to what we have, but when we went there, it was absolutely different, like saltbush, bloodroots, to emu yolks and stuff like that. So we worked with them closely and worked with an Aboriginal person to sort of understand these ingredients better and make cocktails with only Western Australian ingredients as well. So although I feel that like the product that comes to the table might be different, I think the mindset it's what connects us as people. So if that answers your question, I hope. Yeah, go.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. So thank you so much, Vijay.
Thank you.
Everyone, don't forget to tune into Asia's 50 Best Bars on May the 3rd as well.
Thank you guys. Yeah.